weeks ago. That's out the window. It's draft time. So me and my guy Johnny here, we're going to be looking through some of the early prospects, look at a early evaluation, especially with the Senior Bowl, and seeing who the 49ers should target all after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3, dominate.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another show. Show day today, but I've got to end it today with a very special guest, a guy who we've always well respected on the channel, Johnny. Johnny, how you doing today, man?
Oh, doing pretty good. Did a show last night with Jason Hurley. So man, it's we're getting into the off-season vibe, I guess. It's always the least favorite part of the year, but it's one of those that, especially under the circumstances that our off season has kicked off on. But it is what it is, and we're looking forward to 2023.
Yeah. Yeah, we are. That's something to say. And before we start, I gotta say I do like your drip today. I mean, the hat's cool and all, but the shirt's on point.
Hey, this shirt was given to me by my friends at Manscaped. No, I'm not going to go into a long plug. I know people are used to that on my channel, but they've been a good friend of the show, and they have helped everything, and they are helping sponsor some off-season content. So I'm gonna rep my Manscaped. I have everything from the beard trimmer to every other trimmer, and they're just fantastic products.
That's great. That's great. Y'all, you got to check that out for sure. But we got to get into this because, I mean, the 49ers, it's clear that similar to fans, the loss didn't really sit well with many players. You've heard a lot of comments. Brandon Ayuk was the first one to talk about it. Jimmy Ward talked about it on that Instagram Live. And then we heard this week during Media Row Week, we've heard Debo Samuel talk and George Kittle. Well, not George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey talk about it as well as Robbie Gould. We've heard a lot of different comments. What do you think?
I think it's very much the after effects of when a team doesn't feel like they were beat. When you look at that game, I had people message me and comment on different videos and say, "Hey, are you going to break down the Eagles game, the NFC Championship game? You should break that down." And I'm like, and my response to everybody was, "There's nothing to break down. The video is literally going to be an intro, and here Brock Purdy gets hurt. The end." That's the analysis of the game, that we had no quarterbacks. Josh Johnson, even if he's in the game, Josh Johnson was signed week 11. I mean, he was signed when Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt.
Yeah, week 13.
So yeah, week 13. Okay, so he'd only been with the team for a month and a half, not even fully 2 months, and you can't expect that guy's going to come in and you're going to have any sort of offense against one of the better defenses in the championship game. If this was week 16, okay, maybe. But I mean, there was no realistic chance. And then he gets hurt, and there really was no chance. And I mean, it's a game that we talked about this before we came on the air, and I said that I bounced back faster after this game because 2021 felt like we ran out of steam just 7 minutes too late or too early. It was just like the team was on this emotional run for so long, and they ran out of steam right at the end. They had the game and they lost it, and it slipped away. This game just felt like it was taken from you. It felt like it was taken from you by injury, that you were not beat, you lost. And that's a completely different feeling for teams and players when you feel like you were not beat, you lost. And I think that's what you're seeing in the result of all of this, because they're sitting there. What else are they supposed to say? I mean, I agree with what Debo Samuel said, because if you put yourselves in their shoes, are they supposed to say that we believed going into that game that we were not going to win? No, absolutely not. They believed going into that game that they were going to win. Did anything happen in that game to say your plan going in would not have worked? No. Your quarterbacks got hurt. You couldn't run the plan you had. The end. They have no reason. There was no proof put on on the field, nothing that said that their plan would not have worked. And so why should they believe anything else? It wasn't proven wrong. They lost. They were not beat. So I don't blame them at all for being as salty as they are and having the attitudes they are. That is what you should expect. You should expect your team to feel like, yes, we would have won if we had a quarterback. So, Eagles fans can be mad about it. I don't care. Eagles fans have catapulted themselves into in maybe the worst fan base in the NFL in my mind. I blocked so many people during that game, after that game, and because I had people that I don't even know, they were tweeting at me, they were messaging, they were DMing me on my Twitter, foul things. I mean, it was more profanity than actual words, and I'm going, what in the world? Like calling me all sorts of names. I'm like, who are you? And there's just these Eagles fans. I mean, it was literally in the hundreds of people that I was blocking. So I have zero respect for the Philly fans. I have a good friend who's a Philly fan. We decided that we weren't going to talk about it, and um, it's one of they sent me to a dark place. I'll be honest. I had to delete a tweet. I was wishing that the Eagles would feel the same pain that we did. I wanted to see the Eagles try and compete in the Super Bowl without any healthy quarterbacks. And I'm sorry for wishing injury on anybody, but I was in a dark place and I was pushed there by Eagles fans. I guess I can accept some
Oh man.
you know.
Yeah, the Eagles. Yeah, it was an interesting one, and I mean, I felt the same sentiment as you. No, nothing really posted about the game as much, just because there's nothing to talk about. And when you talk specifically about the players and their comments on the Eagles, I talked about it with Jack Hammer. Now, can you maybe argue that some of them are unnecessary or some are overblown? Yeah, but the 49ers, they aren't like hiding it. They know that they're salty. Brandon Ayuk tweeted himself, "Yeah, I'm salty, but don't pretend like I'm gonna come out of this and not sleep another second without really caring about it." They are salty because they got a game taken away where they didn't have a chance to compete. And the other part is they're asked questions. What do you think they're going to say when they're asked the question, what do you think could have happened? And so they're kind of being paved into the way to saying what they're saying. And yeah, I mean, you can critique it. I can see both sides of it, but it's the competitive nature. And I also think that you do go into the playoffs thinking your team's going to win. Now, when you have this overarching theme of saltiness and players believing that they're better maybe than they actually are, then maybe you have a culture problem. And maybe that's something that you address in the offseason. But at the moment, I think it's understandable, especially given that fans felt the same way about how the game went. But yeah, enough on that because we've got some fun draft talk to talk about. And before we start, Johnny, I wanted to ask you about your experience because you went to the Senior Bowl, and I wanted to just ask you how was the experience there?
Man, it was great. Mobile is not that far from me. It's about 4.5 hours. So I wasn't able to be down there the whole week, but I did go and saw some practices. And like I left my house at 5 in the morning, drove straight down there. I had never been to the Senior Bowl, so it was a fun experience. I drove straight to the stadium from my house to make practice and check-in times for the credentialing. Now I will say you would think that they would have a little more signage or direction for what's going on down there. I literally pulled onto the college campus of the University of Southern Alabama when I was a little confused because I just saw USA everywhere, and I'm like, okay, these people are very patriotic. And then it dawned on me, University of Southern Alabama. But I went straight to the stadium following my Google Maps, and there was no signs for like media parking, nothing. And they sent this really long email that said a lot but didn't tell you very much. And about the check-in process, it told you that what gate to go to, but there's no map of where that gate is. They tell you which parking lot to go to, but there's no signs telling you where that parking lot is. So I was pulled into the wrong parking lot. I'd asked the security guard that was there. He's like, yeah, I think so. This is your parking lot. I sat in the wrong parking lot for about a half hour. Finally found my way there. Met Wayne Breezy for the first time in person. Wayne's a great guy. We hung out. We went out to dinner that night and had a good old time. Had some Alabama Gulf shrimp, which is some of the best shrimp in the country. So if you're ever in the South, go down to the coast of Alabama and go to the original Oyster House, the original Oyster House. Fantastic food, no matter what you get. He had some real Southern hush puppies, which was fantastic. If you know, you know. But it was a good time. The first day, it was just overcast and gray. Saw some good prospects. They stuck me in the north end zone during the game where there was literally no shade. I was in the sun for 6 straight hours. I am just now recovering. My nose is not nearly as red as it was a few days ago. My forehead isn't as red as it was a few days ago. I got pretty burnt down there at the Senior Bowl, but there was some good players to see and some guys that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I think it's a cool experience. I hope I get to go out there sometime over the next few years. It'd be a fun experience. Glad to see that despite the difficulties, you still made it out there. Despite and you had a good time. It seems. Let's talk about those prospects though, because there are a lot of prospects, a lot of talented players. Ooh, we got the
Yeah,
credential too.
yeah,
There we go.
there's my media credentials. It proves I was there. So, yeah, it was
See,
a good
it's
time.
not a ghost. It was actually the real Johnny Dell out there.
It was.
But talking on the prospects, let's not focus on the 49ers for a second because there are a lot of talented players there. A lot of players that either draft stock rise, draft stock dropped. Who are the guys that caught your eyes?
So there was one guy that it was real quick caught my eye, just the way he moved, the way he was in warmups, individual drills, into the 7-on-7. A kid, he's a safety out of Illinois. It is Sydney Brown. I had to
Sidney Brown. Yeah.
I always want to say Tyrell or something. I don't know why, but I was like, wait, I know it's not that. So I looked down at my sheet. It's Sydney Brown, safety out of Illinois. Really, really liked what I saw out of this kid. And it was all the way through. I mean, the way he carried himself through warmups, individual drills. They were doing. He was on the national team, and they were doing some one-on-ones with defensive backs versus tight ends and receivers in man coverage drills. And I will tell you, he looked better in man coverage than most of the corners that were out on the field. And because there was a one particular matchup that was really fun to watch during those drills, which was him with Durham Payne, or sorry, Payne
Oh,
Durham, the tight end out of Purdue. He
yeah.
was
Hmm.
Yeah, okay. He was another guy that I was watching. He was smoking everybody, but the matchup of him and Sidney Brown was like a draw. You know, he would maybe barely win on one rep, and then Brown would win on the next one. And then we saw in the game, if you watch the game, that Durham he had a very good game. And what I saw in practice, as far as the smoothness in his route running and the way he would use his body to create leverage, it translated straight over into the game. That he was probably the national team's, in my opinion, their best receiver on the field, as far as guys that you had a high probability of getting a catch when you threw their way. So to see Sidney Brown matchup in man coverage on him in drills where it was two-way goes. They weren't just sitting there with having the sideline as a help the whole time. Really, really impressed, especially from a safety. And then to see that translate into 7-on-7s, and how sound he was in his coverage and reading the releases of the receivers, that he was rarely in the wrong place. He didn't get targeted hardly at all during 7-on-7s or 11-on-11s or in the game. And there was a reason for that, because he was always in position. Now, does he fall to us in the third round? I don't know. I feel like he helped his stock a lot there
Yeah.
at the Senior Bowl. It'll come down to the combine. The biggest comp I can give for Brown, and it was crazy because I saw it real quick. I hadn't seen anybody else make this comparison, and then I was seeing this comparison all over the place after I left. But is Talanoa Hufanga, the way he moves, his body size, the just the way he attacks the ball, he really, really reminds you of Hufanga. And I think that would be really interesting to have the ability to have mirrored safeties on with the team, because we don't know what the status of Tayshaun Gibson is. We don't know what the status of Jimmy Ward is. And so, like Eric Norris said, and I've told some people this, that yes, you absolutely could always use. We have a bunch of picks. I don't think we're going to use all of them. We could move up into the second if
Hmm.
they really like Sidney Brown. He was a kid that I've talked about him on a few different shows and a few different places that I'm really high on. If there was one guy that I said, if we could get one guy out of the Senior Bowl, Sidney Brown is that guy. I mean, there's a few other guys that I liked, but nobody I liked as much as Sidney Brown.
That is a really good comparison, really good insight because there are a lot of intriguing parts about Sidney Brown. And I like the comparison you gave, Tano Hufunga, because he's a guy who can play in coverage, who's a guy who can kind of fill that role. But his number one and number two traits are the instincts and that quick range speed. And that's kind of what Hufunga has. He has that quick burst, but the instincts are really, really there. Brown does struggle in tackling a little bit. I've watched a solid amount of his tape. Obviously, him being a Big Ten guy with me and the Big Ten, but Brown's an intriguing player for sure, and I do think that I agree with you with that second round comparison at the moment. We'll see where exactly he ends up falling, but a knock on Brown at times that people and analysts like to mention was the issue against tight ends. But it's cool for you to mention that specific one because Payne Durham obviously is a solid tight end, one of the better ones there, it looked like. And Sidney Brown was able to match up. That's a cool comparison that you brought out there.
Yeah, and it was he was just a guy. Again, he jumped off the field to you. When you watch film of some guys jump off the tape. He jumped off the film. Sitting there, I just found myself consistently watching what he was doing and seeing how solid of a player he was. So, he really jumped out to me. Another one guy that's intriguing to me. I'm not sure how high he'll go.
Go
Uh,
for it.
is and I'm not sure how I feel about him yet. Is a guy, linebacker Dion Henley.
Okay.
He's from Washington State. Okay, uh, really good athlete. Really good athlete. He feels like he's pretty raw as far as a linebacker. So he was playing the mic there at the Senior Bowl. What I really liked about him is his range and, like I said, athletic ability, smooth hips, is able to change direction really quickly. He reminds you of a little bit smaller of a Dre Greenlaw. As far as that, I do believe we will need to fill Aziz Al-Shire's spot this offseason. I don't see Al-Shire staying with us. I would be shocked if Al-Shire is not in Houston next season.
Right.
So we Henley fits the mold of our kind of linebacker. Now, one thing that the knock I saw, at least from practices, and I haven't been able to go and watch a lot of film on him, is that he looked like he wasn't as advanced scheme wise um, and in identifying everything that he was seeing. Struggled sometimes with strength calls. Sometimes he struggled reading run pass, things like that. Now those are things that you can improve on, that linebackers work on all the time, that can be improved on. What you can't teach is the speed he has. So again, where he impressed me, I came away, I had heard about him before I went down there. Early on in the first half of practice, I was kind of, I don't know. And then they went back to some individual drills, and he was covering running backs out of the backfield. And we all saw a lot of the coverage of running backs cooking everybody. Okay. I will say that when you're playing man coverage drills and it's running backs out of the backfield, that is one of the hardest things to cover. Corners will struggle doing that. Henley covered just about every running back out of the backfield, and it was able to do it with his athleticism. Is that he matched their speed, matched their change of direction, and so he was a guy that again is intriguing. The raw athleticism, he's going to be a guy that you would think would shoot up the draft board, but playing where he did, and the production wasn't always there, and some of the bits of being raw will I do believe that he will be within striking range of us in the draft. So he's a guy I'm interested in. Defensive
That's
line.
interesting.
Yeah. So are you familiar with Henley at all?
I am, just because going into the Senior Bowl, there were a couple of linebackers that I thought who could replace Aziz Shire. Obviously, the number one name that everyone talked about, Ivan Pace out of Cincinnati, likely goes way too high for the 49ers to make a play for him. But Diane Henley, the range it seems like is somewhere between the second and the third, somewhere in that range. Maybe it could go either way because the athleticism is intriguing. And I mean, when you talk about Diane Henley, it's interesting that you say that. I do want to ask you though, how did he look in terms of the athleticism? Did it seem like what you had expected? Was that an area that really flashed for you in terms of his profile, or what was kind of the area that you were impressed by?
Absolutely, the athleticism. I mean, he was without question the most athletic linebacker at the Senior Bowl. There was nobody who matched his sideline to sideline speed or change of direction. And again, the smoothness in the hips is something that I can't overstate. And that's one of
Mm.
those things that you kind of have to see it to really see it. And again, those running back one-on-one drills really showed that off, because again, these running backs are coming out and they'll take an outside leverage and then cut back inside, and his ability to flip his hips and attack the route is something that you don't see often from linebackers. You see that's the kind of stuff that they expect and ask and look for from corners. So he had very unusual athleticism for a linebacker.
That's cool. That's cool for sure. You were talking about the defensive line. Who caught your eye there?
So there's one guy. He's from Northwestern, Adebawar Adedemiwa. He was a guy that he's an intriguing player because he uses he's not a tall guy. Okay, he's not a real big guy. He's like 284 pounds is what they have him listed on my Senior Bowl roster sheet that they gave us. So, but where he caught my eye first, and people are going to think this is silly, was actually in just the slow individual position drills. Where they're going around the blocking dummies and things and the bags. He blew me away there. It was more where more I he really made you take notice. Everybody, I will tell you, everybody in the stadium heard him going through the individual drills. You'd look over at the defensive lineman. A lot of people love to go look at the offensive linemen or the running backs or the receivers running their routes and things. I love to see the defensive lineman because it tells you, in my opinion, who is going to be the worker. Because you would look over there and you'd see some guys just kind of jogging through and hand strike and hand strike. Then you look at a Debawar, okay, and you saw number 99 come out there. And man, you'd hear him going through those drills. He was grunting and fighting, and he was giving every single rep every bit of energy and effort he had in individual drills at the beginning. Okay, this is a 2-hour practice. He's running, he's huffing, he's going for it. He's attentive with the coaches. I loved the effort, the motor, and then that translated over into the drills with the offensive line, the 7-on-7, which is the front sevens on sevens. On each other in those drills with run fits, and then in the 11 on 11s he absolutely gave every rep 100% effort. He's a shorter guy, and he has a little bit longer arms. He plays with really good leverage. What he reminded me of is a Kerry Hyder. That's where I would put my, if I had a
That's
comp for him.
interesting because
um
that's definitely an effort guy. And I see you have a trend here of picking Big Ten players. Maybe it's because I'm on the show, but I got you. I got you.
Well, it was guys that just, like I said, that jumped out at you, and maybe it's because the Big Ten, they know they had to show out at the Senior Bowl. They
Right.
don't come from the SEC where every game is a showcase game. Because like a tight end that I liked is the tight end out of Alabama, Latu. I think that's a guy that may fall to us. I think his style falls to us, but I didn't see anything there that made me change my mind about him, or that was way different than what I saw with him playing 75 miles from me in Tuscaloosa. Alabama's defensive linemen, they were what you'd expect from an Alabama defensive lineman. They're going to be solid. They're not going to see the field if they're not solid. You can't go wrong with those guys. But what it was just intriguing to see some of these guys that I wasn't as familiar with, and see them just
Hmm.
kind of jump off the field to you. And I'll tell you, there was a guy from Wisconsin that
I know
intrigued
who
me,
you're going to say, though. Yeah. It's
Keanu
that boy,
Benton.
Keanu Benton. Yeah.
Okay, like another guy again, individual drills really impressed me. He had good bend for a big guy. I mean, he was a big guy and he had some good bend. I will say another comp for that guy, I would say a DJ Jones.
Hmm.
That's who he kind of reminds me of. So, you're seeing these. What I was also looking for were guys that look to fit the 49ers and what we do in our culture. So those were the guys, mostly. Honestly, the American team, I think, looked sharper in practice, but there was more guys from the national team that really kind of stood out to me, and I think that was also one reason why the national team won. Another part was because the quarterbacks for the American team were trash, and they also were missing several players that they had early in the week. The American team did,
Hmm.
but that there was those guys from the national team were guys that, to me, I would be absolutely thrilled we pick any of those guys.
I think that that's fair. And I mean, all three, or you might have said four players there, but
Yeah, four.
those are four talented players, four really talented players, and a couple of defensive linemen, a linebacker in there, and then the safety. Those are positions that the 49ers may need and look to target, especially defensive lines, a place where they've always targeted safety. They have the vacant hole with Jimmy Ward likely gone to Sean Gibson, pending, mulling retirement at the moment. And so, yeah, I mean, it'll be intriguing to see what they do. And going back to one thing you said about the 49ers, they have a ton of capital in this draft, which means they could look to trade up. Now, they did the same thing last year, had a good amount of capital, and elected to stay where they were. They have even more capital with the compensatory formula this year, and they may look to trade up. And a couple of these guys, well, you're going to have to likely trade up, given that their draft stock could continue to rise as the process continues to go along.
Absolutely, absolutely. One guy that on the American team, offensive side of the ball, that intrigued me was a guy, and I made the mistake of tweeting this at Brad Graham, and he had a clip of this guy getting rocked, and
Uh-oh.
for real, I couldn't see it because when again, I was in the north end zone, I was literally almost by the goalpost.
Right.
There was some things when there'd be run plays, I would miss everything that happened second level area and beyond. Um, and he sent me a video of this guy getting rocked. It's either that or when I was trying to find shade and went and got nachos right before halftime. But a guy, Torrance Osiris, he was a
Ah,
guard from Florida. He
yep.
did get it. Like Brad had a really bad rep of him just getting rocked by, I think it was Dion Henley. But I will say, as far as he caught my eye in the 11 on 11s during the American team period, as far as a guy, he had good feet. He played with pretty good leverage at the point of attack and could get to the second level and looked like he was a very good zone blocking interior lineman. So again, I don't think he's not a guy that I would look to come in and unseat Burford or Bruns or excuse me, Banks, but he's a guy that I think you can put in there and you have a swing guard or swing interior offensive lineman that allows Brunskill to play maybe swing tackle. They sometimes like Brunskill there. He's a good
Right.
run blocker. I think he can be a depth offensive lineman there as a guy that I felt like would fit our system. So I know Brad was real high on the center that was there with the American team. I'm blanking on his name right now, but and then some people really like Bergeron, the tackle.
The tackle
Uh,
from
you know,
Syracuse, yeah.
yeah, from Syracuse. I didn't catch a lot of him at the Senior Bowl. There's a lot to catch, and it moves really fast. So, those were the things that really stuck out to me.
And I think Osiris Torrance, he's a guy who, because obviously the first position I scouted for this draft was quarterback, and every time I'm watching Anthony Richardson, who I have to say impresses me a good amount, but every time I'm watching Anthony Richardson, I'm saying, God damn, the protection ain't bad. And then who am I looking right at? Number 54 on Florida's offensive line, because Osiris Torrance had a pretty solid year in terms of pass protection this year as well.
Yeah, I mean and again he played with good balance. He moved his feet in pass pro. I didn't see him just getting whooped in pass protection. And he was playing against some good defensive linemen. Some of these guys are like the guys I'm talking about, Keanu Benton and Adebo were okay. He's playing against some good guys that were there. So it was just one of those things that stuck out to me. I will say, I was very unimpressed with the quarterback play at the Senior Bowl. Very unimpressed.
Oh man.
Um, and Duggan was supposed to be the guy down there, and he played
Mm,
terrible on Saturday.
yeah.
He looked good in practice on Thursday, and I will say looked good in the sense of that he didn't look as bad as every other quarterback that was there. I
Right.
will tell you, mechanics of these quarterbacks was bad. Footwork was terrible. Duggan's footwork was the best, but you could really see, and this is my concern with Duggan coming out, which with whatever team drafts him, I hope is the Cowboys, that he's not used to getting deep into reads. It was very much 1-2, look to run. Um, that's a hard habit to break on guys. That's a really hard habit to break. I know one thing that Kyle has talked about that really got him excited about Trey Lance was that he wasn't a 1-2 run guy, that he was a guy who looked to get the most out of passing plays when they are there. That's one thing that we really like about Brock Purdy when we've seen him play is he exhausts the play. Duggan was not that kind of player. I was very underwhelmed by the quarterback play. I mean, they would do walkthroughs in the beginning, and I'm trying to remember who it was. It was the kid from Washington State,
Hmm.
uh, their quarterback. I mean, he couldn't even hit crossing routes like that were going
Damn.
on. He was throwing them at guys' shins, coming through. It was just it was not a good look. So they were not accurate during the week. There was a lot of stuff there. So quarterback play was very underwhelming. I don't think we're gonna find our quarterback number 3 from the Senior Bowl this year.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, these quarterbacks not too talented. The guy who you might have looked for had he not been injured was Hendon Hooker, but obviously his ACL injury is there. One guy that I want to bring up, I don't know if you got to see much of him because it's an offensive lineman, but a guy who I didn't watch much of the Senior Bowl clips on him specifically, but I watched his tape, and he's a guy who I actually came about and really enjoyed, and it's Emil Ekiyor Jr. of Alabama. He played center at the Senior Bowl and apparently impressed. Scouts were impressed that he could play that versatile position. He played guard at Alabama, and really, I thought he was a very solid guy, a guy who popped off for me. What do you think about him?
Yeah, so I wasn't really paying attention to him. There are a lot of the Alabama players I wasn't really paying attention to again because I
Right.
live 75 miles from Tuscaloosa. I see a lot of their games. Um, i- he was a guy I can tell you from watching their games on the year, a lot of explosion, a lot of raw
Yeah.
power, and but good feet. He's a good athlete, and that's what allows
Hmm.
him to be able to play center or guard. Is that he's got really quick first step, so he can play any of those interior positions. Doesn't give up a lot of pressures. He's good to get to the second level. And now they played little more power man at Alabama this year than they had in the
Correct.
past. They had Bill O'Brien there, who most people would know from the Patriots in many years past, and more recently the Houston Texans. They tend to run more power man. They do run some zone, but with their previous guys at Alabama, they were much more a zone running team. This year was a lot more power man. And I mean, he's got good drive off the ball. And so, yeah, I mean, if we picked him, I would not be upset. I was really hoping we would pick up Alabama's center a couple years ago, Landon
Which one?
Dickerson.
Oh, yeah.
Dickerson. Yeah, he was my draft crush in that year. Not gonna lie, I like it before we traded up, and it was obvious that we were picking a quarterback. The two guys I was really pushing for was Landon Dickerson or Asante Samuel Jr. Those were the
Mm,
two guys I was looking for, or Patrick Surtain. I remember I was really high on Patrick Surtain out of Alabama as well, but it was Dickerson, Surtain, or Asante Samuel because those were guys that you were looking at might be in the mid first round, kind of guys. And so I was really pushing for those guys. And Dickerson, man, I will say, when I scouted the Eagles, that dude is a monster. You
he
want
is
you want to watch
good. Yeah.
You want to watch some really good guard play in this league, go put on the Eagles tape and watch Landon Dickerson. Him and Kelsey are
That duo was
just
so fun. Yeah, I mean,
they're
like, it's the opponent, but it was so fun to watch.
like they can do things that very few teams can do. I mean, they'll have Dickerson on power blocking down angle blocks, and then pull Kelsey. You don't have many teams that can pull a center. I remember you're looking at like Kelsey, and I remember the Jets used to do that with Mawai. You have to have a very athletic center to do that.
Mhm.
But the kid from Alabama, he pulled a lot in there in when playing guard. So, that may be something that, hey, you plug that kid into center, which may be a spot that might be open. Now that gives you the opportunities and the options to start running some of that stuff that Philly is running. So,
Right.
I really like that guy and
Yeah,
that prospect.
I agree, and I mean, it'll be intriguing talking about who will fit the 49ers and things like that. Really cool insight from you on the draft. Let's transition a little bit because the draft is one part of the offseason. The second part, though, is the part that comes first, and that's free agency. 49ers have a lot of key decisions. We talked about a lot of positions where they could have needs at defensive line, maybe offensive line, maybe linebacker with Aziz Al-Shire likely gone, and things like that. Who do you as the number one free agent for the 49ers in terms of who they should resign?
It's hard to say number one. As far as who's the guy that's going to be hardest to replace, if it came down to who's the best player that's entering free agency, I would say Jimmy Ward. If it was the guy that's the hardest to replace, I would say Mike McGlinchey. Uh, and I know I'm going to get roasted for that. I know fans, Mike McGlinchey, I talked about on my show last night. If you're a Parks and Rec fan, just let us know in the comments because I'm going to make a Parks and Rec reference here. If anybody watched the old show, that there was a character on Parks and Rec that they said was the punching bag, right? It was Jerry Gergich. If you watch the show, Jerry was the punching bag and of the show. And I feel like Mike McGlinchey is Jerry on our show
Mhm.
or with our team, that he's the guy that fans love to just beat up on, and we love to McGlinchey, and he has had some bad reps. I mean, he's put some bad reps on film. He also has put a lot of really good reps on film. Uh, with McGlinchey, you're getting about 90% good, 8% and 2% really bad. When he's bad, there is no like bad, there's just really bad.
Right.
And and that's the 2% really gets highlighted, and it seems like it always comes at the worst time, right? So, but if you're looking at, okay, where does Mike McGlinchey rank as far as tackles on the market? He is going to be one of the top tackles on the market.
Correct.
There's not a bunch of tackles out there that are just way better than Mike McGlinchey, or even an upgrade in any way. If you look at where does Mike McGlinchey fit in rankings of the league, he's a top 15 tackle in this league. There's a lot of bad right tackles in this league. There's a reason that they're right tackles and not left tackles. So, I don't see a path for us to upgrade Mike McGlinchey. And yeah, I know the guy from Tennessee is available, but again, at what cost? Or is he going to be available? And is that actually still going to be available when free agency comes around? I doubt that Tennessee is going to let Wright walk. I think they're going to try and do what they can to re-sign him. I just don't see an easy path to improve that right tackle spot. We don't have a pick in the first two rounds. We have a lot of holes. We have a lot of guys to plug in there. If you're going to be trading up for a spot, I don't see. I think you're talking the top tackles in the league that are in the draft that are going to be available to replace McGlinchey are going to be gone by the middle of
Correct.
the second round. I mean, I think you're going to see 7 or 8 tackles drafted within the first 60 picks.
Yeah.
That's just is kind of the trend in the league. It just tends to always happen that way. I just don't see a path to upgrading Mike McGlinchey. So to me, I say you have to find a way to make that work with McGlinchey. And I think he would want to make it work, but it's about how can they structure the contract or the contract right to fit under the cap. We have 9.1 million in cap space right now. I was talking with Jason last night, and he projects that we may work out some contracts to get up towards 15 or 16 million in cap space. It doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to remember the league is still adjusting from COVID.
Correct.
There's 11 teams right now that are negative
Like
on the cap,
way negative
like
too.
way negative. Look at the Saints, and the Saints are $60 million over the salary cap right now, and that's because they had to kick $60 million down the road from last year because they were 90 million over the cap. Imagine being a team that wasn't even a 500 team that missed the playoffs, has no franchise quarterback, and you are $60 million over the cap. That sucks. That's cap hell. Like, that is the
Mhm.
49ers of the early 2000s. We're not doing that bad. We're only sitting like 4 million in less cap space than the Chiefs, and we have 13 more players under contract than the Chiefs have for next year. So, it's just it's a situation where that I think they can make it work. If it was me, Mike McGlinchey, I say that's the spot you've got to plug. You have options for things. They may not be the best options, but I do feel that McGlinchey is the one that's hardest to replace. People can say Mosley, but we were still a really good defense when Mosley was out. He's not the hardest to replace. You could say Jimmy Ward, but we have some guys that can come in there and play. I don't think he's the hardest to replace. McGlinchey, to me, hardest to upgrade from there.
I think that that's a very valuable point. I mean, when you talk about the right tackle position, there are a couple of things. One, you pointed out the draft. The draft, you're right. The top tackles are likely going to be gone within the first 60 picks. And when you add in positional value, well, teams overdraft at the tackle position. You saw Trevor Penning go very early. You saw, I think it was Tyler Smith go at 16 last year when he was projected to go maybe in the second round. You see, tackle will be a position that's overdrafted. Now, this year does have a pretty good group of tackles. Maybe not the 2020 levels. I don't think anything will match that, but a solid group of tackles that'll likely be drafted within the top 20. Maybe the top four will get there, but then you're going to get those guys reaching for tackles, and the top ones will get off the board. So to me, that's where I think it's tough. Where if you're going to depend on the draft, especially with the draft being after free agency, if you're going to depend on the draft to be the place where you get your replacement, because you don't know who's going to fall where, and you also want that specific guy to be the man of the future. Mike McGlinchey is a very polarizing guy. I'm in sentiment with you though that he is a tough free agent definitely to replace, and if you add in positional value, he is the toughest for the 49ers. Now, for me, in my retrain board, I had Emmanuel Mosley at number one. I think the value that he provides and the contract that he should likely command fits the 49ers a little better than the Mike McGlinchey contract. And I wonder if the 49ers will bring him back at the cost because it will likely be a valuable cost. Now, while we mentioned the 49ers don't necessarily put as many resources into their offensive line, you do have to remember they paid the left tackle to the highest contract in NFL history. They love the tackle position. They like the center position. Those are the two positions they value the most. And Mike McGlinchey plays one of those positions, which is why they're going to be in the running for it. I think I like that situation there, and the breakdown that you provided with Mike McGlinchey.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, if we remember Richburg, they gave him a big contract at center. It's very much they focus on tackles and centers. McGlinchey obviously being a first round pick, a high first round pick. Trent Williams being the highest paid left tackle in history. The big Richburg contract. They went out and got Alex Mack, who was a long serving quality center. And really Brendel was only playing by default. They were really thinking that Mac was going to come back for another year, and Brendel was only there by default, and he did get better down the stretch. Early in the season, he was really, man, it was like we're one Brendel block away from a 70-yard touchdown run, and we started picking some of those up in Brendel did in down the stretch of the season. Is he the long-term guy at center? I don't know. I think, like you said, it gives you the ability to try and go after and improve that center spot if you retain Mike McGlinchey. I do like the Mosley thing. I I feel like he's probably going to get a deal similar to what we gave Jason Verrett coming off of his injury when we brought him back, about a $5 million a year deal, and then possibly some incentives, maybe get him up to 10 million that you can do as like not likely to be earned incentives, so they'll get tagged on to next year's cap if you do that, and that way we keep his cap figure to like 5 million on the year, and then you do McGlinchey as a backloaded contract, high bonus up front, backloaded. And I mean, because if you're going to sign McGlinchey, he wants a 4 or 5 year contract. He wants that big payday. So you have the ability. I mean, the cap should shoot up over the next couple of years after we get out of the 3-year cost spread out time from
Right.
COVID, and these TV contracts are kicking in. You should see the cap north of 250 million within, probably even by next season. So
Ooh,
it gives you the
okay.
ability to. I just wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it gives you that ability to kick some of McGlinchey's cap down the road. Because it sounds crazy at $9.1 million, we're still like 11th in the league in cap space. We're in the top third of the league in cap space. That now we're not the Bears who have 95 million because they suck. But we're not in a terrible position, and it'll be interesting to see if we plug some of these holes from the cap casualties. I'm wondering, how the rest of these teams are going to restructure, or they're going to be cap casualties like the Rams had last year. They lost 8 free agent or 8 starters to cap casualties and things. Are we going to see some of those, and what are those going to be? That's the biggest, I guess, question mark going forward, and that can always change everything, is who's going to be available through cap casualty, because that'll help really kind of piece together what our strategy will be.
Right, because it's not like the 49ers are the only team going through. So you talked about the Chiefs, that's one example, but a lot of teams are going to have to figure out this cap situation. And the 49ers, they're one of the smarter organizations and have figured out how to maneuver it the last few seasons by effectively managing the restructures, not over restructuring to where you're stuck in cap hell for a season or two, but also making enough restructures to where you can create enough cap space while also being not too ruined for the future. They've restructured contracts like George Kittle. They've restructured contracts like Ark Armstead in the past, even Trent Williams. All three they've restructured all up to within the last year. I think this year, though, it might be a little different. You might not see, I know numbers have floated around like 60 million potentially the 49ers could have. I don't think the number gets that high. I think they're a little more smarter, especially with you don't want Armstead's cap hit to just continue to balloon. Williams is pondering retirement. You don't want the dead money to be on your hands if he is not going to play for you, and they can get out and save $13 million next year should he choose the retirement. I think Fred Warner makes sense given he just signed the deal and he hasn't been restructured yet. And also, Warner's young enough to where you believe he's going to be here for the next 5 seasons. The other guy, the obvious one, is Christian McCaffrey. He has no guaranteed money left on that deal. He'll likely get restructured. And then Nick Bosa's contract extension should lower his cap hit to a much lower figure than the 17 million he's projected to make in terms of cap hit for 2023. So there are a couple of moves, but again, the 49ers, how they maneuver the situation, where they choose to prioritize will be important. And a question I've been asking to my fellow guests this week, and I want to ask you, offensive line, defensive line, to splurge, where do you think the 49ers should address? Because they have the offensive line issues, like you said, with players being free agents, but defensively, their defensive line wasn't as strong as we'd seen in the past this year, especially compared to 2019. And so, where do you think the 49ers should address if they were going to splurge?
Well, I think when you look at the teams in the playoffs, what you see is they're built from the trenches. You have the Chiefs. They have they rebuilt their offensive line, and
Right.
but it's not like they've done that at the neglect of their defensive line. They got some good players on their defensive line. You look at the Eagles, and they probably have maybe the two best lines in the league with their defensive front and their offensive front.
Right.
Okay. And I mean, year in and year out, you tend to see what the teams that end up controlling the line of scrimmage tend to go the distance. And we like to talk about quarterbacks and how much quarterbacks matter. And yes, you have to at least have a healthy quarterback, as we know, but you really want to win. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is probably going to be the greatest quarterback in this era,
Right.
and he scored 9 points in the Super Bowl when he had no offensive line, and the Buccaneers' defensive line was all over him. You saw the Bills went from a team that everybody thought was going to go all the way to they lose Von Miller, and suddenly they're not the team that they were. To me, if you're going to splurge, I think, because just look at the pay scales of defensive linemen and offensive linemen. Your best paid guards do not get anywhere close to your best paid defensive tackles. Your best edge rushers still get paid a little bit more than tackles. They are still valued more. So I think what you're going to see is, if you're going to splurge somewhere, especially with draft capital, always pour into that defensive line. You can never have enough really good defensive linemen. Seattle during the Legion of Boom days, people forget that they had waves of defensive linemen that they could just keep coming at teams. And I remember the Fail Mary game that I remember Steve Young talking about it, that he felt like the biggest thing that was going to be overlooked in that game because of the Fail Mary was how as he put it, the absolute mauling of Green Bay's offensive line by Seattle's defensive line. They had like 9 sacks in that game. Seattle's defensive line during their Super Bowl runs were phenomenal, and they had just wave after wave of good defensive linemen. To me, you can never have enough good defensive linemen.
Funny enough, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I would choose the defensive line, and I think the 49ers learned their lesson that, in a way, the strategy they tried to implement in 2022, acquiring a boatload of depth to try and really mask the not the failure, but the identity that you don't have a second star pass rusher alongside Nick Bosa. It's not like it didn't work. The 49ers were still a good pass rush in 2022, but not necessarily at the elite levels that they were in the years past when the defensive line was spearheaded them to the levels of success that they faced. And they were still in the NFC Championship. I think the 49ers, I do think that they should prioritize the defensive line. And in terms of splurges, especially because it's harder to find offensive linemen in free agency, but it's not as hard to find defensive linemen, especially talented guys. The defensive tackle position has several key players that can be there. Even at the edge position, there are some valuable picks that you can go up and get. We saw it last year. We're going to see it again this year. A lot of people, myself included, have pointed out Deron Payne as a guy who could potentially pair with Arik Armstead, a guy who can be a 3-down player, and maybe that's what you need come playoff time. Those star players where you don't necessarily have to take them off the field, a guy who you can really depend on in those key snaps, because that's what the 49ers have somewhat been lacking and what opposing teams have beaten them with. The way to beat a strong offensive line is with a strong defensive line. And the thing that we've seen in past years is that strong offensive lines have been keys to opposing teams. And you're right, you've got to build through the trenches if you want to win a Super Bowl. That's the number one way to win that Super Bowl. And I think that we've seen that this year. These are two teams with very good with very good play in the trenches. I mean, the one outlier that I could really point to is the Cincinnati Bengals last year with the poor offensive line and sometimes when you have that one poor side, you're not going to win the bowl. You can maybe make it past your conference in a weaker conference, but you're not going to win the bowl. And so quarterback play is important. But the one thing I will end off is the 49ers, they understand that there's a philosophy to potentially get the Super Bowl. Utilize that quarterback on a rookie contract. Why? Because when you do so, you utilize the extra resources to other positions, more specifically the trenches, where you're going to look to pay up and get as much talent as possible, be it via free agency or the draft, because that's where you can really focus on running going for a Super Bowl. In the last 6 Super Bowls, there has been at least one quarterback on a rookie contract for one of the teams. This year continued it with Jalen Hurts. I mean, Jalen Hurts this year, Joe Burrow last year, Mahomes 2 years in a row, Jared Goff in 2018, if you remember those days, even Carson Wentz, if you want to include that Philadelphia Eagles team, all on rookie contracts. And so that's kind of a key to success. You obviously want an elite quarterback, but having that quarterback on a rookie deal is also very valuable because it allows you to incorporate the rest of your resources into key positions on the team. I think the 49ers should look to try and upgrade the defensive line. I think that should be a priority this free agency.
Absolutely. I mean, you can even go back to Russell Wilson with the Seahawks. When he was on his rookie deal, look at the conference championship games. 3 out of the
Right.
4 quarterbacks were on
Definitely.
rookie contracts, or or had teams with starting quarterbacks on on rookie contracts. Obviously, the 49ers was Trey Lance and then Brock Purdy, but they didn't have three of the four teams did not have that franchise quarterback size cap hit,
Hmm.
and the Bills were right there. They still had Josh Allen on his relatively small thing. It'll be interesting to see where they go because next year his cap hit shoots way up, and our it did in it's like you say, that makes a big deal you're seeing in this league. I wonder how much of the strategy of teams, and I think that's why you're also seeing so many. You used to never see a quality quarterback hit the market. I mean,
Correct.
even if they were, like a guy that was going to be 17th, 18th in the league, they still weren't going to hit the market. Teams tended to hold on to them, no matter what. Now you're seeing every year, it seems like 4 or 5 quality quarterbacks are hitting the market, and there's who's going to go where. And a lot of that has to do with what you're talking about is the advantage of having a quarterback on a rookie deal.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And you're talking. I mean, when you look a little forward, right? A lot of the top 10 quarterbacks, you don't see them right now in this stage. Josh Allen was one, Dak Prescott potentially being another. Lamar Jackson's a guy who's going to get a deal. You talk about him hitting the open market. And I mean, there are a couple of these guys. You talk about maybe if you want to include the Aaron Rodgers and the Tom Brady's, uh, a lot of those guys didn't make it to the stage because of their teams just aren't good enough. Their teams weren't comprised of enough talent because you had to make cap cuts. And I mean, when I talk about it, I think you can create examples for every team. The Packers had to let go of star pass rusher Zadarius Smith this year because they didn't have enough cap space. I mean, you can mention something like that for every team, and it makes it more difficult and difficult, which is why it's that much more imperative that the 49ers capitalize on the next 2 years when they have their quarterbacks on the rookie contracts, because that's their real Super Bowl window. Unless they restart it all over again, which will be extremely tough, this is the when you've really got to capitalize and get the Lombardi, get your sixth trophy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the thing about the Chiefs is almost really, really frustrating is they just seem to be insanely good at drafting. They rebuilt that
Right.
offensive line. They really did. And they did it almost entirely through the draft. Like
Hmm.
their offensive line is very good and they built through the draft. I mean, they got like Isaiah Pacheco, who it came out of nowhere. I mean, and he's this super productive guy, and they've just been able to do that, find role players, man, they're there because they don't have a quarterback on a rookie contract, but they got a whole bunch of other players on rookie contracts.
Correct.
So you either have to hit on a bunch of guys on rookie contracts, or you have to hit on one guy at the quarterback position on a rookie contract. That's really how you have sustained success in the NFL. And the Chiefs have really been able to corner that market, and we hate them for it.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about it. Creed Humphrey, second round pick at the very end. Trey Smith, a guy who I wish the 49ers drafted with any of those picks, a sixth round pick. He's a very talented right guard. And then you talk about the left side. I mean, Orlando Brown was the trade, but then at right tackle, I think they still roll out Andrew Wiley. I mean, it's a young group of players that they have over there in Kansas City, and they've been able to manage. They've really have.
Yeah, yeah. Great offensive line. And I mean, like, just they've been able to plug guys in on defense, and it just seems like, they always have a pretty good defense. They're never a great defense, but they're good when it matters. And they
Mhm.
got young players that play the scheme well. And man, they just, like I said, you hate them for being able to do this.
Yep, yep, yep. But Johnny, it's been a really fun time this past hour getting to talk to you, breaking down your thoughts on some draft prospects. For those of you guys that missed that portion of the show, make sure you guys go back and check out Johnny's thoughts from the Senior Bowl, and then some nice free agency talk here to end the show. Any last comments before we head on out today?
Man, no, it's always a pleasure to come on. Always a pleasure to come on. I'm definitely gonna have you on my channel here during the off season. It's gonna be awesome.
Yes, sir. And I mean, I appreciate you, but what I really appreciate is the setup behind you. I mean, that's always a pleasure to see every time you come on the channel. But once again, Johnny, I really appreciate your time, and chat. Appreciate you guys. You guys always come through with fun comments, fun questions. So thank you guys as well. But guys, that'll be it for today, and we'll see you guys next time.